just shot them. Hey, dude right here just shot them. Dude right here just shot all them down there. That dude just shot them right there. That dude right here. Yeah.
Someone injured straight ahead.
All right, everyone, welcome back to our podcast here at Gunslinger USA. I am here with Jake Pries, who's the owner and lead instructor of Distributed Security Quad Cities. Jake, want to tell a little bit about yourself before we jump into this?
Yeah. Again, my name is Jake Pries, and I have a 15-year law enforcement career. So spent 20 years in the Iowa National Guard, 2 combat deployments. I was a small arms instructor for the Iowa National Guard, small unit tactics instructor for the Iowa National Guard, combatives instructor for the Iowa National Guard. And then with Davenport, spent the majority of my time on patrol. I left the department as a sergeant, spent the last 5-6 years of my career on the department as a supervisor in one capacity or another while on the street. So that's me.
All right. So, so everybody, so now that we've introduced our wonderful guest speaker, who I've worked with a lot since we're right here next to each other in the same backyard, same little pond. We're gonna hit really briefly the Rittenhouse shooting. There's already a million stories about it, so the rights and wrongs, the legalities, the morality of it, we'll leave to other people. We're going to touch on the decision-making process and how incidents like that, regardless of what led to them or what put that person in that situation, plays into your decision-making process and how you can apply the lessons of the OODA Loop into those. What's your, when this news first broke, what was your first impression, your first thought to cross your mind?
Well, so with Rittenhouse, I think initially it was just a bad situation, right? Like overall, it's a no-win situation. And does anyone ever really win in a shooting? No, no one ever really wins. Somebody usually gets to go either home or jail, or the other party goes to the morgue, or they go to the hospital with everlasting injuries.
So now in all of your classes, because you do have a pretty you have your combative handgun course, and of course you got smaller, shorter ones. You have a pretty good selection, and the ones I've attended, you do, and I've heard you bring it up multiple times, the famous, or probably the most famous decision-making cycle, the OODA Loop, the Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, John Boyd's brainchild, which he himself took 20 years to develop. It was not a simple thing they came up with, rolled out of bed and came up with one day.
The OODA Loop is, and let me back you up a little bit just to kind of go over what the OODA Loop really is. And you mentioned it, it's the decision-making process, right? And to put this in perspective, people do this every single day while they're driving, right? You're driving down the road, you're constantly getting input of information from either vehicles around you, the radio, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you feel through the steering wheel, what you feel through the pedals. Even the most basic driver does things within the OODA Loop every single day. When we talk about the application of the use of force, or whether it be in defense or anything else, the big thing we have to remember is action versus reaction. And the action versus reaction within the OODA Loop is something that the reactionary gap will always be longer than the action gap. And what I mean by that is, when you decide, it takes about, for the average person, it takes about 0.06 seconds to actually see and understand what it is you're seeing, right? For your brain to process that information. And that's usually for somebody that's relatively locked in. And that's usually in a relatively calm environment, okay? From there, it takes about another 0.25 to 0.3 to put whatever action you decide to do into play. So if we equate this to like on the range, if I'm using a shot timer, right? If I'm on target, my finger's on the trigger, and as soon as that shot timer goes off, it still takes me about 0.31 seconds. You have to process even if I'm on the trigger, right? Hear that beep go off. That 0.6 or 0.06 is my brain processing time to understand, okay, beep went off, now I can pull the trigger. That 0.25 to 0.3 is my brain telling my finger to pull that trigger, right? So at a minimum, I'm at a 0.31 to 0.36-ish on a shot timer, already pointed in. That's not including the draw. That's not including finding the threat, orienting to the threat, deciding what I need to do to the threat, and then actioning whatever my decision was. So when it comes to the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, I mean, this thing was all over the map. I mean, he's got multiple adversaries that are aggressing him. He's been hit in the head once. He's had Molotov cocktails thrown at him. And again, I'm not glorifying anything that he did. I'm not condoning anything that he did. I'm simply explaining from an overall perspective what kind of chaotic situation that is.
It's interesting to really look at it as you are. And it's good, and I do want to say that, you do bring up the OODA Loop a lot. A lot of people bring up the OODA Loop, it's practically every firearms instructor on earth brings it up, but 99% of them present it wrong. You actually, as you said, it's a continuous cycle. You present it correctly.
So it's something that builds on itself, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm on the line and I'm teaching somebody how to pull the trigger, let's say, they have to observe what it is that I'm actually telling them, right? They have to observe where the target is. They have to observe all the things around them. They then have to orient their brain towards what they're actually going to be doing, right? They have to make the decision, hey, I'm being told I got to pull the trigger, right? And that's all I got to do. Then they have to decide to pull the trigger, and then they have to pull the trigger. But even in that process, they're going to have to do that over and over and over and over again. And the minute that they stop observing what it is that they're doing, the whole OODA loop gets thrown out the window. So then you have to restart at the beginning. And that's why in a defensive situation, it's so important to get inside your adversary's OODA loop and to make them do what you want them to do instead of reacting to what they're doing.
I really can't, that was spot on. It's almost hard to add to that, except maybe they're reacting and they're also getting isolated from each other, from their environment, from you. They're not only reacting to everything you're doing, they're getting confused, they're losing sight of each other. If your adversary happens to be an individual, he's still getting isolated and disoriented and losing sight of what's happening in front of him. With that said, especially as an instructor where, and you have potentially, you might see a person's face one time and then you'll never see him again. So it's kind of your one chance to instill whatever you can in him. And you might have a longish time, right? So your combative handgun course, you have, 16 hours plus whatever interface you have with them in between. But on the other hand, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you might just have an hour with somebody. So it's a bit of a dilemma, how to emphasize to someone how important it is to really do that, to really continue honing the skills, because it's not something that you can just know. It's not the same as actually being able to do it.
And that's why, we try to put it into that practical application, right? Of, if you look at anything that anybody does, whether it's playing sports or driving or just moving through their normal day, every single day, and usually within a couple of minutes, they're making decisions within that OODA loop constantly. So that's one of the things we hit on in the class is that, yes, we are talking about specifically the OODA loop as it applies to self-defense and as it applies to the defensive use of a firearm, but to make them understand it, it is using their everyday activities and showing them that they use that OODA loop within their everyday activities as is. And, during that, it's very important to show them that if you are deciding to do something and I am your adversary, I need to get inside your OODA loop to change that so that I give myself the best advantage to win. And the person that understands the advantage usually wins the conflict.
Yeah, what's interesting too is, again, feed off of what you said in my earlier point about, you can teach someone about the OODA loop and not how to do it yourself. With Boyd's initial, with his Air Force application, with his feeding off his, his earlier studies on aerial combat, which led to what we use today. The F-15, F-16 airframes all are basically modeled around, in large part, what he envisioned modern aerial combat to be. But with that said, pilots are less than 4% of the total Air Force. And if you look at the population as a whole, I don't know, I wouldn't know the real number, but I guess it's a very tiny percentage of the population who are even capable of being combat pilots, who can sit there in a very complex aircraft. You have a map on your lap, you have compass or whatever. It can be kind of a mess in that cockpit, and that's
right.
an enclosed space.
You've got a multitude of inputs all at once, and you have to process that information. But again, the OODA loop speaks to what is important right now. What do I need to concentrate on right now? And what can be white noise and what can be sat on the side or what can go on the back burner for a minute. And again, I'm not a combat pilot, but I can tell you from operations, it's what is the most important or most deadly threat to me right now? What do I need to work at, or what do I need to observe, and how do I need to defeat that threat right now? The rest of it, as you go through training and as you go through all kinds of other stuff, you learn to what we call rack and stack that information in your brain, right? So after you deal with the most lethal or most dangerous, then you move on to the next one. And that just goes all through your OODA loop. And you can observe, multiple threats at once, but you're going to have to orient to one threat. You're going to have to decide to deal with one threat. You're going to have to decide to act on one threat. And you can do that in a very quick fashion if you train it and if you understand what it is that you're doing. We see, I call it vapor lock. You see people get vapor locked on different scenarios because their OODA loop gets stuck, right? They're stuck in this. They see what the threat is. They've oriented towards the threat, but they cannot decide what to do. And as soon as that decision is broken, it goes right back to observe, orient, observe, orient, observe, orient. And that's where we have to train them on how to break that vapor lock, make it to the decision phase of the loop, and then enact that decision.
And what you just said there, it does remind me of a historical example going back to the American Civil War. It was big in Gettysburg and other battles as well. They would look at soldiers, bore-fed rifles, and they would find that person hadn't fired a single shot. He was literally stuck loading and loading and loading and loading. Like we'd have 6 or 7 balls stacked on top of each other. He was just stuck in that one phase of the drill without even being aware of it.
Yeah, and some of that goes into, the human instinct of not wanting to kill another person. We talk about, or we see all these different instances of, homicides and all this stuff. It's a very unnatural act to kill another human being, right? So in the Revolutionary War, in the Civil War, in many of the early conflicts, you're right, they found a lot of, barrel-loaded rifles that had multiple shot in them. Those guys would go through the process of loading, come up on shoulder, and they just wouldn't pull the trigger, because they could see that was another person across the battlefield from them. The idea behind those big battle formations was just to create a wall of humanity, and, it kind of dehumanized your opponent, right? Especially when they're all wearing the very same uniform, they all look together, they all look alike. So it enabled, soldiers to be able to do what they needed to do. And that's why, even back in the really early ages, you had to train your body, train your mind to overcome that natural instinct of not wanting to hurt somebody else. And that's why, you know, guys in, you know, martial arts or hand-to-hand combat and stuff like that, they're able to do what they do because they legitimately go black, and it is just a straight up fall back on instinct and fall back on training. It's not a conscious decision sometimes that they are going to do the most violent things they possibly can.
You know, on Killing, Colonel Dave Grossman's book reminds me of another section, which piggybacking off what you just said too, is what I found really interesting. And we just sit there with the stereotype that these weapons were incredibly inaccurate, when really the opposite was true quite early on. Even early 18th century, maybe even earlier than that, you'd take soldiers out on the range and they could get, you know, bullseyes on circular targets, but then you take those same soldiers and take them out in the battlefield, they're shooting over people's heads. Even the firing squad, you have to get a whole group of people. So you had one guy, it'd just be too much pressure.
Well, and that, you know, the firing squad mentality, we can go into on a whole other topic of discussion. But yeah, I mean, it's much easier for me to train someone how to shoot bullseyes than it is for me to teach somebody how to instinctively put rounds into a humanoid target. You know, as soon as you start putting faces on it, as soon as you start putting characteristics to it, people tend to kind of freak out a little bit, and rightfully so. You know, those people that have not been around that for very long, or it's new to them, or whatever the case may be. Yeah, I mean, it's something that definitely it takes a lot of training to train that out of your mind. It takes a lot of training to put it into your OODA loop, right? Reaching back to the topic at hand, to make that decision to put rounds into that adversary that is a human being.
And when it comes to, and you know, so we've touched on a couple, you know, factors that go into freezing up or just your OODA loop breaking down, all of which is especially hard on an individual, because, you know, if you look at whose OODA loop model, you know, you can have the best of the best, the pilots, the best trained soldiers out there who can do it naturally just from a huge amount of training. And, you know, when you look at you know, kind of a command staff situation, you have a whole huge number of people all filling is like a giant brain. And it's like you have each of those steps that, like you said, are continuously feeding information back. As a whole group of people, even then, they don't get it right a lot of the time. And the OODA, you know, his famous patterns of conflict slide deck, his presentation he gave to very high level people like Dick Cheney, even, that's 12 hours. And that's just introducing it to you. And it's like, we have so little time to get that message across to students.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, the dry practice is so important. That's why follow up with the instructors are so important. That's why kind of the model that we have, you know, which is modeled after another company's kind of instruction model. That's why it's so important. You know, when you have the constant ability to reach back to your instructor and not just on a one-off go to, you know, say you drive to Des Moines for a 2-day course, and you may or may never talk to that instructor ever again. Whereas, you know, what we offer, it's more of, we're here locally. If anyone ever has a question, a concern, if they ever want to get more range time, you know, we always have the ability to say to them, yeah, we can do that. Let's schedule something. Let's do this, that, and the other. Even if it's, you know, just on a visual platform like this, or, you know, a meeting platform like this, where if I need to punch up a video, I can show them, you know, certain techniques. I can show them certain dry practice drills. I can show them certain things, talk to them back and forth, see what they're doing. And, you know, if I can see anything from the video, I can correct it right then and there. They don't need to spend time on a range. They don't need to spend money on ammo. They can do it right in the comfort of their own home. There's a multitude of advantages to being able to do it that way.
Yes, and it's as terrible as the virus is, it's kind of forced us to look at the tools we had in front of us and realize, wow, we already had these things and we didn't fully realize it. If it was a perfect world, you were just ruler of the universe, is there and you could just do anything. Is there something to make that just magically make that training program as perfect as possible?
I mean, really, you know, outside of a range that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and has, you know, the perfect target retrieval systems, bullet trap systems, and I think having the ability to have a range open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of, you know, pandemic or any other restrictions, and was perfect for what we wanted to do, and being able to do it anytime that we wanted to. I think the system that we have right now is pretty good. But really it's, you know, if ammo is unlimited and firearms are relatively inexpensive and affordable, and you have the ability to access the range at any given time that you wanted to, and I had, you know, a couple hundred instructors that could do the same thing I could do at any given time, that would be a perfect world. Barring all of that, you know, dry practice really is the least expensive way to do what you need to do. You can always get good reps, you know, and you can always, on any of these platforms, reach out to, you know, me or any of the other instructors that work with us, to kind of get answers and to get pointers and that kind of stuff, to be able to be a better shooter and be a better defensive firearms handler. Bottom line here is that the OODA Loop plays into everything you do during the day, all of your training, and with the business model that we have and the training model that we have, you know, we are almost available 24 hours a day. I'm very reachable by text. I know a lot of my guys are reachable by email. If, you know, somebody wants to go out to a range, we've got not only shooting sports, but we can do things at other local ranges and some other local areas. And even if it's like on this, if they can't go anywhere and they don't have a lot of ammunition, we can talk over video. I can diagnose stuff from there, and it's pretty nice to, you know, have this kind of technological platform to be able to do that. Necessity is the mother of all invention.
You know, when I got out of the military, my weapons knowledge began and ended with those basic things they teach you about, you know, handling your M16, your M9, a couple reserve weapons if you're lucky, and really getting into the civilian firearms industry really, you know, expanded that knowledge. And one thing I appreciate, and I honestly want to emphasize people, because not every, you know, people just don't know, training programs are good, and is also something where you can start at the absolute basics and then just continue growing and growing and growing. You know, the NRA does have personal protection series is one that I do like. USCCA, I personally have not taken. Have you ever taken anything with the USCCA? So I'm not going to speak on something that I haven't taken.
No, but I'm a member and I carry their insurance.
I am a member too. I mean, I wouldn't drive around my car without insurance, and so
Yep.
Same philosophy there. So there's a lot out there. And yeah, anything else you want to throw into that besides what we've hit?
No, man, I think we've covered the topics that need to be covered. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're gonna go ahead and close this up. Check out the comments and give us a subscribe.